Okay. I'd like to start this meeting of the Cleaner Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. First item on the agenda is welcome, introduction and apologies. I'd like to welcome all members and officers and guests to today's Cleaner Communities Overview and Scrutiny. Just to confirm, as a council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings. I have not received notice that members or invited attendees wish to use Welsh today, therefore the meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind you that this meeting is being webcast, therefore can I ask that you turn off, silence your mobile phones and ensure that you speak clearly into your microphones. For your information, there are no planned fire drills today, but in case of a fire alarm sounding, please follow the signs to exit the building, which are both sides. Can I also remind all members to sign the attendance register, and can I have confirmation of what apologies have been received, please?
We've had apologies from Councillor Hugh Evans, Stuart Evans, Skeena James and Dave Thomas.
Item 2 on the agenda, declaration of interest. Could I ask if any members should have any declarations of interest that they declare them now? Any declarations of interest? None? Fine. It's noted. Item 3 on the agenda, the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of June 2018. Please could I ask members to scan through the minutes for accuracy and confirm that the minutes are an accurate account of the meeting. Should we quickly go through them page by page? Page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, these are long minutes, page 8, page 9, page 10, and page 11. No comments? Okay, we'll move on swiftly. Item 4 on the agenda is the action sheet. Please could Rachel update members on any actions outstanding?
No outstanding actions, it's just for noting, thanks.
Would have helped. Good job, we've got a loud voice. If you'd like to just all take a seat, try and if you go in the middle and have the two ladies either side, if you're happy with that.
That's fine.
Okay, that's fine. However you wish. Are the mics set up for guests?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you talk, you just press the right-hand button and the red light will come on, and you need to speak clearly into the mic. Can I just first of all welcome the invitees? John Cox, you're the chair of the British Liaison Group.
Yes, I'm the chair.
Yeah. Linda Clarkson, which one's Linda? Hello, Linda. You're the vice chair of the British Liaison Group, and Leanne Newman, member of the British Liaison Group. So I got that right. So it's John, Linda and Leanne. As you've been informed, we have a number of questions we wish to ask you on the consultation process. Please try to relax. We will not try to keep you here too long. I'm hoping that this session is going to be about half an hour. As you know, this meeting is being webcast, so please ensure that you use your microphone when speaking so those listening can hear all that's being said. When you press the microphone, the camera comes in on you, and it's just clearer for the people that are watching this on the webcam. Now, we did let you have the questions in advance, but we won't be just sticking to those questions. I'm sure members will have supplementary questions to ask. It's not our normal practice to put the questions out in advance, but I thought on this occasion, as you're voluntary people, it would be helpful. So I know it was only 2 days' notice, but the intention behind that was to help you with today, just to make that point. So we'll kick off with questions. Could I ask... Lauren, do you want to ask the first question?
Yeah.
Please.
Hello, all of you.
The first question we've got to ask, as you probably know if you've had that, do you think the timing is right for this consultation?
Let me say as a preliminary that we had a full committee meeting on Monday evening in which we discussed all the questions, and although we won't all have identical answers, we have a common approach to all of them. And our reply for the first one is that we actually see consultation as a continuous process. We've been taking part in discussing what's been happening for the whole of the 20 months since the council bought the site, and several of us, and at least me in person, has been involved for 30 years in consultations with the council about what we'd like to see happen. So we're not quite sure about this business of a date for consultation. As far as we're concerned, this is just today, and the whole of our existence is involved with consultation.
I think that's a point well made. Are you happy with that, Norman?
Yes. Could I just go a little bit further? The original money was for the greening and cleaning and safety aspects. Do you think that should have been done first before consultation, or do you think what you just said, I know it's a continual process and it'll probably go on for years and years because these things always do. Do you know what I mean?
We've had an important role in even the cleaning and greening. Initially, the report from the council when the site was bought was about treating multiple shafts and adits. Now we've been able to have input in that process to reduce that number and to actually target the shafts and adits that are most in need of treatment. And we've actually brought down the budget for that by £1 million by looking at it in that way. So our input has been really important, even right from the very beginning.
Yeah. Well, I say well done if you've saved £1 million.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
We'll move on to the next question. Giles, do you want to ask that one?
Right. There's been a number of community workshops and public consultation events held. Was there anything that you felt has been missed out?
We've got an answer here that have been supplied by the community. We got quite the reverse. The first of the current rounds of consultation since Torvain purchased the site placed far too much emphasis on development issues that we already had rejected as inappropriate and unaffordable. The subsequent and more recent consultations have displayed a more realistic perspective for the site. So I think we have had an input that way.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Alan, do you want to ask that one?
I'm tempted to say very little, but in fact we have had a few reports, but we haven't had all the reports we asked for. Most notably, we still have not been told the precise terms of the agreement with the Welsh Government in the sense of what the Welsh Government expects out of it. We have rumours of what they expect out of us, but we've not been allowed to see certain reports, and that's one that's quite critical.
We can possibly pick that point up when we talk to the officers in a minute. Okay. I'll ask the next question. During the process, have the channels of communication been open? I think you've answered this in part because you've said that you've been listened to it, but I'm going to still ask it. Have been open and available to interested parties, and have the views of your group and other consultees been listened to and considered during this process? Now, I know that you've part answered that, but it gives you another opportunity to make a point.
It's been a learning curve for all of us, from the officer's point of view and from the community group's point of view. Negotiations are never straightforward. There have been times when we felt that the plan is veering off track, as we've said, with the cleaning and greening and the development issues. We were able at that point to approach the leader of the council and the chief officer to express our concerns, and we were immediately given appointments with those to look at it.
Which officer was that? Was that the Rachel, yeah.
Yeah. So if the communication there's always been somewhere for us to go if we've had concerns, and many of our concerns have been addressed that way, haven't they? And it's brought us back to being all looking at the site from the same way again. The development on site was the main sticking point, and the way that the money was actually being spent. Our concern was always that we had an end result because we had enough money to complete the task, and we know that that's a finite pot. Whereas it looked to be galloping away at one stage, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, can I ask, Chair, maybe this isn't something you can answer, but as a group, what is your priority? Is it cleaning and greening or development? I mean, or is it cleaning, green and development? How do you see the priority of this?
Okay, I can answer this very clearly. Before the purchase of the land by the council, we'd already worked out a plan for the area which involved cleaning and greening, and no development appeared at all in our plans. And when we were asked whether we as a liaison group agreed with the council purchasing the land, we voted at a public meeting, 54 votes to 1 as I seem to remember it, that we supported the idea of the council purchasing the land. But at that time, there was not a mention of development as being part of the deal. That was something which occurred after our signatures had been given to the agreement. And we have never pushed for development, and we've said at the first meeting when we were told that there'd been this, I can't use the word secret, private discussions with the Welsh Government on it, that development was in art. We said, okay, but we didn't agree to that. We must retain our option of opposing anything you come up with. And our problem has been, or the problem of our relationship has been, that in fact the council officers who picked up the ball and ran with it have been thinking about development from an early stage, and we have been fighting the idea of development because we think it's not on the agenda. Now, clearly, in 20 years' time, after we've got a nature reserve and we've got the ponds back that we asked for, if someone comes along with a plan for development, yeah, discuss it. But in fact, the first 6 months, 9 months, seemed to be the council officers were more interested in development, and the consultants they engaged, who gave a presentation last February, I think it was, actually said that their brief was to identify sites for development. Where we thought their brief was to clean and green the land and reroute the waterworks.
Yes, I've got to agree with Dr. Cox. As ward member, I've been frustrated at times where they keep going on about developing the sites, with housing, where the actual remit was for greening, cleaning and greening. Also as well, they were saying about the planning veering off track at one time, and the costs, they'd worry about the costs running out. I just wondered if they've got any examples of the way the money was being spent at one time or proposed to be spent, like on things like on signs for the sites and a cost saving that we actually, the liaison group actually saved.
I can answer that for you in part, Giles. The ACOM report that we initially received, I'm sure, were you at that meeting yourself? I don't think you were.
No, I wasn't.
It was all about presenting a scheme to us which we couldn't actually afford to carry out. It was far over budget, the scheme that was presented. So there was concern there that we'd actually employed a consultant to look at something that had come up with a solution that was far outside of our budget, and then we had to go away, they had to go away and look at a scaled back version, and they came back with 7 or 8 options. Only the last 3 of those, we could still afford. That was a concern, that we'd employed a consultant and the briefing wasn't as clear as it may have been, and that could have incurred extra costs in the work that they carried out for us.
Thank you. I'm getting a grasp, looking through what's been proposed, how much of this was officers' vision and how much of this was yours in terms of I use the word remediation. Obviously it sounds to me like you going for the green, we picked up probably when we were looking at this that we wanted to go for a green nature reserve, SSI type thing. There's lots of other suggestions in this. How much of that was stuff coming from yourselves in the community and how much of that was coming from other ideas that might sell the money aspect of this, because obviously you've got to hang this on a hook to get money for this.
Can I just butt in a way, you're touching on this question 5.
No, I realise that.
No, and then maybe the group will want to talk about that as well.
No, I'm
looking at give examples of what has changed as a result of the feedback provided by consultees, which is
I was going to ask anyway.
Yeah. So it's wrapped up in the same sort of area. So
shall I ask the question? And because obviously one thing they show, can you give examples of what has changed as a result of feedback provided by consultees? You've already answered my question. I was going to ask that anyway.
By consultees, they could be the public, they could be us.
Yeah.
As regards to us specifically, we had our brief a year before the purchase, which was basically cleaning and greening a couple of ponds, finished. Anything extra on top of that is something which has been created by council officers interpreting their brief as to do whatever they got. Their reason for it is that included within the agreement with the Welsh Government is that at some stage or other they would have to put in a planning application for long-term uses, but they spent so much time on the long-term uses that we were losing out on that. And at the meeting that Linda was mentioning about the options, when we'd gone through these options, which ranged in price from about 10 million downwards, I said, well, it's only option 6A that we ever thought we were going to have. And at the end of the meeting, fair dues, they agreed only option 6A was on the agenda. So what we're saying all the time is that basically we're getting back to what the original agreement was, and we should never have wasted money on consultants for anything else.
I think you were very clear about your ideas and visions on that. That comes through.
If I may, one other thing. If by consultees you mean the public, what is completely obvious from this latest round is that we do represent the views of the community, because it's overwhelming support for what is now on the agenda, and the difference between this round of consultations and the one that took place over a year ago is amazing, because there's basically everyone says, oh, thank God, we're back to what we wanted.
Thank you very much. What involvement, if any, have you had with the suggestion of creating a Friends of the British Group?
We've done it. We've started the group. I'm going to be chair of the group for at least the first year to help them steer in the early days so that they can get to know the officers and the landscaping priorities that we've all agreed for the site. But yeah, we're up and running, and that's come solely from the community.
And just to follow up, perhaps a broader question. Do you feel that when you've approached the council, that your views and your perspectives are taken on board and acted upon fairly?
Eventually, yes. We've been very strong in our stance. We've made sure that we are heard. Just one point about the memorandum of understanding. We'd always worked on a confidentiality sort of basis. We knew that some reports that we might be seeing as a committee weren't for public use. That's the only thing that's really hindered us when it comes to liaising with the community, but the community has given us that responsibility. But we've pushed and we've pushed and we've escalated things until we do feel that we are being heard.
Massive credit to your group. I think you've done a fantastic job. I know I'm only coming into this today, but from the report and everything you've said today, I've been very impressed by what you've achieved, and I think your community should be rightly proud of you.
Just, you've answered questions, haven't really, John, already about... well, ask the question again, but I do think you've made very strong views that the community have been involved in this process, and I think we'll go straight to the supplementary off Stuart then.
Yeah. I sort of asked for that one, but I used the word buy-in, which Kath didn't put down there, but no, because it's the concept of community buy-in. I'm kind of thinking to myself, if you hadn't been as vociferous as you had over the years, and we well know this, because we've been in various forums where you have, what would have happened to it? Because that is horrifying, to be quite honest. I bet reflecting that other communities have had the same sites as the British, and it's been done by the Coal Board, and remediation has been done in other communities, but this doesn't seem to have happened. I just reflect on that, but you've obviously developed community buy-in, haven't you, from what you've been saying, and I just ponder on that, and just like to hear an answer on some of that, if you would.
If I can be philosophical for a moment, if you've got council officers, which includes a housing officer whose job is to push for housing, and another officer who's responsible for forward planning and push for everything, and then you have a project like this turns up, it is natural that those particular officers will come along and push their own particular things. In order to avoid the objectives being distorted, you need to have firm officer hand and say, hey, this isn't part of this project. But the very first consultation which was organised, and by the way, just a point to say, you've only got 2 part-time employees actually working on this project. But you've got lots of other officers who may have an input. And basically, the lots of other officers can have as much of a say as the 2 who are actually responsible for the project as well. Now that requires a management at high level to say, look, these are the real objectives of the project. You're not really needed. You don't even have to come to the consultation because we know we're not going to agree to housing at the end of it, you see. But at the very first consultation, there were members of the public arguing against housing with an absolutely loyal council member conscientiously carrying out her particular role. See? So you can't complain about her. The decision that was wrong was to invite an officer with different requirements along to the meeting. See? Now, all of this comes, there's also been a problem. I'm trying to think of reasons why this has happened. We've had a change of staff. Duncan Smith had been the council officer responsible for the British for more than 20 years, and at the moment of the purchase virtually, he leaves. And so everyone else starts now with a clean sheet. Now we could walk into Duncan's office and say, how about this or that and the other, and he knew because he'll have remembered from 20 years ago of that, you see. But down on a piece of paper it says, lots of shafts and adits are dangerous. Well, we haven't had any accidents with them, but maybe they are, you see. So a lot of time of the new staff was, let's find out where these shafts and adits is, and I spent something like 6 hours going around with the new consultants where we were trying to find, with all this new technology, where these bloody shafts and adits were that were causing a danger, you know. And eventually they found one, and they cleared an area of 25 yards all around it, and dug down and put in a concrete thing and a grill over it and all the rest of it. So it's pretty safe. It was pretty safe before, you know. There are certain things which really are potential hazard. That is, sticking water underneath coal tip is, you know, even before Aberfan we knew it wasn't a great thing to do. That we've got to get rid of, and that's why Duncan in his report to council said
one of our priorities is to get the water back on top of the surface, which is to keep it on the surface rather than stick it down underneath the... So we had this problem of communication in that the personnel changed at the same moment as the purchase, and then we seemed to be just, some people looked at it as if, well, you know, local residents are always going to disagree with whatever goes on, you see, which in this particular case was true with what they were trying to do. But we had come up with a very positive proposal in the first place.
Thank you, Chair. You're just going back a bit, and in relation to consultation, I mean, what are your views on consultation with wider bodies, either within Torfaen or Welsh bodies, about this area? Because after all, it's this is your community, and obviously your views are pretty strong with this. But I mean, it is a piece of Torfaen land, and there are other elements in with it, and everybody shares in the assets and the amenities that Torfaen provides. How much credence do you think they should be given to other bodies and their views on that area?
Can I ask what you mean by other bodies to start off with?
Well, it may be Friends of the Earth, for instance, or it may well be somebody who represents Glenbryan, who would have a view, and somebody from Glenavon, some other group who are sat there, maybe a local history group that's in Pontmernydd, for instance, who might have some views on it. I'm just saying, do you think the consultation should be a bit wider than it has been, or do you think there's been a satisfactory amount? I'm just wondering as well, if they did that, whether there'd be a variance of views in terms of what we do with it that might not sit with you. I'm just wondering whether you feel that you should be totally at the centre of this, or whether other bodies in Torfaen should be involved.
The community actually were the first people to invent Gwent Wildlife Trust into the proposals that we put forward, the alternative proposal that the community made when the site first went up for sale prior to the council purchasing it. So Gwent Wildlife Trust have been very involved in the consultations on site. There are local history groups. They are aware of the site. They're very keen to continue to stay involved with the site, to record the history and look at what we can do with these listed buildings. The community's vision for end use is not just as a nature reserve, it's as a leisure resource and somewhere that we can increase tourism to the area. We can link in with maybe Glenavon World Heritage, Green Meadow Farm. We'd like to put a heritage trail there where we create walks with information boards, restore our buildings, look at what the ironworks was like when it was working, as well as the sort of how it's a beginning to end story. It started off as an area of industrial use, became derelict, the nature took it over, and now we're looking to bring it back into public use and ownership, really. So we have been loosely consulting with other organisations in the local chapel, local history groups, Gwent Wildlife Trust, Friends of the Earth are aware of what we're doing up there, and they're in support of it. So we have, but maybe not in specific terms, consulted.
So you'd be happy if they did consult on a wider basis then, because you've done some of it. I don't know whether the council has done some of that, but I mean, if you talk about, for instance, Glenavon and Green Meadow and the rest of it, appears to me to be a lot more things that could be done, because I'm broadly, I must say, in sympathy with what you're trying to do, but we need to get everybody on board with it, don't we? And I just wonder whether or not we've gone wide enough with this, or whether we're a bit narrow in terms of the people we've consulted with, not you as a group. I'm talking about the Borough Council.
The drop-in sessions that have been arranged have been widely advertised across Torfaen. Anyone's been welcome to come to them, but obviously the main focus of interest is with the local community, because we've been battling to protect this site from open cast mining for 30 years, so it's dear to us. Hopefully the wider Torfaen area will get on board with it once we've been successful in the initial clean and green, and then we can look at other end uses. But we have to achieve that first. We've got to have clearly identified aims that we spend this money on, otherwise it's going to run wild and we're going to end up with half a scheme.
As we've been told the other day, there's around a 3.1 billion budget to do all this work on the site, and we've learned as well today that there's only 2 part-time officers actually running this scheme, which you would have thought with this amount of money would have been somebody permanently overseeing it. As a group, what would you like to see with site's involvement? Would you prefer it as it is now with part-time officers, or would you want one dedicated officer overseeing the project? As a group, what would you think would be best for the British and for the liaison group?
I think that's a sort of management issue for how the council deals with it. I wouldn't think that we as a group should be commenting on that.
I agree with you on that, John. Stuart's next.
Yeah,
And then
John's illustrated an issue that I think might be useful for us to suggest to Rachel, because one of the things you said about Duncan leaving, and you said about the mapping of the audits and things, but I'm on several other groups that work with the council. What you've illustrated is a problem we got when officers leave, and we respectfully got losing a lot less staff than we would have had 6-7 years ago, and key staff go, and then other staff come in. I think there's, John's illustrated, I mean, I'm talking about canals and things like that. We've got the same officers, and a lot of them are the same officers doing the work. Yeah. You rather illustrated that problem, which we worry about on other groups. Could we make a note of that, if we could, please? Because I think it's rather illustrated the problem you've had, and some of the groups I'm on, exactly the same problem. It's great that we work in partnership with the council, and you obviously got the part-time staff, but that is a very real problem. In fact, I suspect some of the staff that work with things like water and etc., exactly the same staff, and that illustrates some of the problem when we're doing things like this. So that's a note we can recommend to Rachel, I think, about that problem, how we do continuity. It's been brought up in my committee as well, by the way.
Thank you for that, Stuart.
Just a quick one, following on from Stuart's note, if we can ask the officers as well why the development model was added after the purchase was agreed with the group. I'd just like to understand what the history was behind that.
Can I slightly correct you on that? It was added after we had been involved in consultations and said that we'd support it, but it was there at the time of purchase, and in the report to council, Duncan did include development, but it wasn't as minimal development. It wasn't there just to satisfy the Welsh Government, as far as I think it was. It became the most important thing, and there were officers present at our first meetings who were clearly only interested in the development and couldn't care a stuff about the cleaning and greening.
Linda next.
Can I just expand on that slightly? If you revisit Duncan Smith's report, you'll see that he spoke in terms of actual and aspiration.
Yeah.
The actual phase that we were looking at funding was the phase 1 cleaning and greening, but the aspirational aspects of it were to be considered at that point, because obviously if you don't, you could undo anything that you could bring to the table in the future, and that seems to have got out of context slightly somewhere along the way.
We're also talking about as well. I also think some of what you're saying here, we have third parties in the borough, I'm thinking of people like TVA and that, where we actually could guarantee some of this partnership work. And again, the other committees that we've been dealing with, not necessarily my committee, but we've got, maybe we need to look at when we're doing a project where we've got voluntary groups and the council memorandums of understanding, that we actually might have people like TVA and maybe WCVA act as an interpreter to come in and make sure there's not conflict, because it sounds to me that we need some guarantors in there, so we take away some of the heat in these situations. That might be a suggestion to look at it, because it obviously sounds to me like communications and some interpretations to these things that shouldn't happen, because if you've got a transparent and open process, and obviously you're quite qualified technically, I know that because I know what you do, and ordinary people, there shouldn't be these breaks in processes. There's going to be disagreements because people have different ideas, and I've heard what you said. and officers have professional ideas about things, but if they're in the middle and it's an arbitration thing, I mean, this process is part of it, but, you know, and obviously people have got different ideas and ideas, but we do have processes around which we negotiate.
I can just come in now, Stuart.
Yeah.
We can pick that up, particularly at the end of the meeting when we're looking at recommendations. We've overrun our time now, so what I'm going to do now is give you a last little slot, if you wish, to raise any burning issues with us. And as you know, next we're going to be we're going to be questioning officers. So, are there any issues that it's an opportunity for you to raise any issues with us now in the last couple of minutes, please?
I've just got one point I'd like to make, that the Borough Community Engagement Officer has been involved with us right through from the start, and she has been tremendously helpful in making sure that we're working in partnership as best as we can. She's attended our meetings and maybe helps us along the way to make sure that communication is sort of still ongoing.
That's an excellent positive note for us to finish this first session on. Can I invite you now, you're very welcome to go back into the public gallery and watch the rest of the meeting. It's also available on webcam. It's entirely up to you. Yeah, of course you can, Norma.
When Duncan brought his report to the council, and we knew that the council, with the help of the Assembly, were going to buy that land. Yeah. The whole council applauded. Now that doesn't happen very often, but the members were delighted, you know. I know, Giles, were you here then?
Yes.
Yes, you were. Yeah, of course you were. And when we started to look at this, when we had our meeting earlier, I thought, what on earth are all these things coming into it? Because Giles had the same meaning. Why don't they just get on with what they were going to do in the first place and have it as a lovely area for the community to enjoy, you know, the wildlife and everything? And I am so delighted to hear that's what your aims are, because reading the report, this report, that doesn't come across. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? I am absolutely delighted.
The other thing is...
Thank you, Chairman.
The other thing is, I mean, I'm sure on behalf of the committee, we'd like to applaud the work that you've been doing over many years on this, you know, and we appreciate it greatly.
Thank you for inviting us. Our views haven't really changed over the last 2 years. It's just been a little bit more of a devious path to get to where we thought we were over 2 years ago, but I don't think it's due to any evil intent on anyone's part at all. Everyone has been trying to carry out their own terms of reference as employees of the council, but I think we would have liked them to pay more attention to us from the word go, but it was a new team that took over, and it was natural that they listened to absolutely everyone, and possibly our views as the community representative just got buried amongst all the other views. I think we're back on track at any rate. We're basically doing what we said 20 months ago.
John, we'll finish on that note. I'd like to thank you very much, the three of you. So it's up to you now, whether you were in the gallery or watching up.
Very high up in the gallery.
I can just scan them in his offices.
Yeah, we're just going to invite the officers to the meetings. There'll be a slight pause in their proceedings. We're just waiting for the officers to arrive. It won't be long. Okay, we're now moving on. We're still on item 5 of the agenda, which is the British Master Plan approach. We've reached the stage now where we're going to welcome the officers to the meeting. I know you know the officers, but I'm going to still read out their full type of them names. We've got Rachel Jellett, Chief Officer Technical Services, Neighbourhoods, Planning and Public Protection. And we've got David Leach, who's the North Torvine Programme Manager. We've got a number of questions to ask you on this. We've just had a very interesting session with the Friends of the British Group, and they've given us some food for thought, which we're going to explore with you in a minute. But we'll kick off with the first question, and perhaps Alan can ask that one, please.
Thank you, Chair. Now you've carried out a number of community workshops and communications and public consultation events. Is there anything that you would do differently going forward in terms of that kind of activity?
Yeah, so I think we definitely continue with the approach that we've done, and we'd certainly look to roll out more of those workshop sessions. I think going forward we'd probably look to wrap more communications up around those as well. So as the project moves from an early design phase in terms of the master plan into more about delivery, there's going to be more happening on the site, and it's going to be happening much more quickly. And so there's going to be a bigger need for us to make sure that people are kept up to speed when they see vehicles going onto the site and things like that. So we'd certainly still want to be running workshops because I think they've given us some useful information. We'd certainly want to be putting things online like we've done before, but I think we'd look to wrap that up with broader communications as well. The other area that I think has worked well in this latest batch of workshops that we didn't do in the first one is working more closely with younger people. And that's actually thrown up quite a few interesting comments and useful comments for us. So we'd probably look to delve into that a little bit more for future workshops too.
In terms of consultation, the British Liaison Group made the point was quite clearly they don't see a time limit on consultation. It should be constant and happening all the time. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with that. And I think we had big aspirations at the start to be doing things like blogs that we do all the way through. We struggled to do that in honesty because of time pressures elsewhere in what we've been working on the British. But going forward, as we start to move into more active delivery of the projects, absolutely, that's something we look to do.
I think it's also we need to accept that with projects like this there will be some technical assessments which take time and which therefore you're not going to have information to go into the public domain. So therefore you can almost lose interest because you're communicating stuff which has no value or no message just for communication's sake. So I think we want our communications to have a purpose, to be targeted and at the right time. And I think that's more important than constant communications. There was a period where, earlier this year, there was a bit of a silence, but that was because I was new in and I was asking for things to be reviewed and checked to get up to speed to ensure that if we were moving forward. So, there was periods of silence or, what might appear to the public to be an inactivity, but that doesn't mean that there's not anything going on. It's just sometimes might be people doing water analysis or digging down into shafts and adits and finding out, and that is just technical work which needs to take place as well.
Thanks, Chair. What benefits have you identified since introducing the two memos of understanding between the Council and the British Liaison Group and the Gwent Wildlife Trust?
Okay, if I take the MOU with the British Liaison Group first, this is much more recent. It's only been finalised very recently, but we understood the terms of it a while ago, so we've been trying to work towards that. What I think we're hoping now is it will allow us to open up more of the documentation, which will allow some community scrutiny on some of that documentation. At the start of the project, we weren't opening up as much documentation because there were confidentiality issues within it. So this MOU gives us a framework for governing that now, which is great, and I think that'll be useful. It also sets out more clearly what we think the different roles are of the different organisations within it. So activities around promoting the site and promoting responsible use of the site is an area where we'll look to work really closely with the liaison group on, for example. Particularly now as we move forward into the delivery of this first phase of works, where we're on to some of the probably more exciting opportunities when the master plan comes forward. So there's going to be a change in that dynamic that I think the MOU helps us to govern. So hopefully that will set us on the right path now in terms of engagement on that side of things.
Just in terms of documentation and confidentiality, one of the points the British Liaison Group just made to us is they're not always being clear what the Welsh Government want. Can you comment on that, please?
In terms of what the Welsh Government are expecting to see from the British side? Yeah, so we submitted a business plan to Welsh Government when we were looking for funding or part funding to deliver the scheme, and that set out our aspirations for the project essentially. If you bear with me, there's about 8 objectives within that, one of which was around appropriately managing health and safety risks, which was the crux of the what we were looking to do. One of which was around enhancing environmental resilience and improving biodiversity, strengthening the aspirations of communities in the area to provide for future generations, supporting health and wellbeing goals by improving green infrastructure, protecting and promoting heritage and culture, unlocking opportunities for private and third sector investment, particularly focused around jobs and growth, unlocking opportunities for potential future housing development, and unlocking opportunities for potential green energy. So those were the elements that we put within the business plan to Welsh Government, and that then is what we translated into the council report that went in October 2016.
Right, so I think in terms of the MOU, and in terms of the sharing of documentation, a contract, which is what the grant offer letter is from Welsh Government to the council, is not, they're not, you don't see council, these are signed, between Welsh Government and the Assembly with terms and conditions. It's not normal practice that these documents would be shared out to the public because it is a formal contract between two parties. The MOU gives a framework within which that information can be shared, and actually it's one of the first things when I came into post and I met with John and with Linda. They were saying, we don't feel the process is transparent, we're not seeing everything, and actually, given the lack of an MOU, that was appropriate at that time, because there are certain frameworks which we have to operate within, and Welsh Government would also expect us to operate in as well. The MOU now allows us for that greater transparency because we've put a framework around it. So that's the benefit of that.
Yeah, I fully accept what you said there, Rachel. All I was trying to do was, the group have made a point to us, and I as a scrutiny committee, I think it's our duty to follow up, the concerns that they've raised, and so we've done. Stuart can come in now.
I want to raise that question because obviously I scrutinise on other committees, and one of the things that worries me, and I say that because they raised the point, you've got a lot of voluntary action there going back 30 years. You've got other organisations you could have worked with to help you with that, like TVA is one example I'm thinking of. And I understand the confidentiality but we have other examples of where this has been worked in the council. I think obviously I well know the Waterworks project and things like that, where you're working with voluntary organisations. Some of the work's done mostly by the council, but you get that action in there, which is we well felt that here, where the activity is driven by the voluntary group, even if they don't do it. So, all right, you've got a contract between the council and the Welsh Government, but you're in danger of trouble. I don't know how you put it. The energy comes from the voluntary group, and it's about, we're talking about open government and democracy, that stuff. Mm-hmm. How you write that in, I know it's difficult, and it's not neat, and it's not tidy, it's lumpy, but how you get that in terms of open government, and bear in mind we've got confidentiality as well, how we do it, and there are ways around it, yeah.
Hopefully we've got round it now.
Sorry, if I could just pick up one point from that. Going forward,
How would you do it differently?
Going forward, there's a really good opportunity now to introduce TVA. I'm sure the group would have told you they're moving towards a Friends of the British approach. So there's going to be opportunities now for some active volunteer involvement on the ground within the project. There's fantastic opportunities there for TVA, and not just TVA, TEA, Groundworks, other organisations to come in now and get involved in delivering those types of projects.
First.
Yeah, very quickly. As you said, the actual agreement between the Welsh Government and Tory Council was a confidential agreement, but do you think that there was too much emphasis put on the scheme at first about housing on the site instead of making safe, clean and greening, which caused a lot of upset within the community of the Aberystwyth Ward and surrounding area?
Having come to this this last year, the first thing obviously I did was go back to the council report, and to me housing was not at the forefront of the council report or the request for Welsh Government funding. Dave has listed out the 8 objectives. Housing is not specifically mentioned. Unlock opportunities. That's number 7 of 8. So I think actually, there's always been a concern about what that site, and I heard at the meeting in August, but this whole history of the open cast mining, and then I suppose some suspicion that there might be housing. But actually, in terms of what's ever been in writing and what I've seen in terms of, coming forward from all the council reports, it's always been about a fair balance, and the last few years about this development framework being put in place, which is trying to cover safety and also unlocking future development. Now, I think because it was in the last LDP as a strategic area, that naturally leads to an assumption that it is going to be built on, there's going to be lots because it's in the LDP. All that means in the LDP is it's a strategic area for review and for potential. And I think, it's never been a written or a stated aspiration of the council the last few years for this to be a major housing site. In fact, the plans that are now being put forward clearly demonstrate and hopefully alleviate those concerns.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Thank you.
David, you've already touched on question 3, but we can ask this question because we asked it to the group previously. What has been the outcome of the suggestion of creating a Friends of the British group? Now, you raised that just before we had this little discussion.
I think it's a great idea, and I think it's a really good opportunity to start engaging people positively in the site. There's been a lot of animosity in the site over 30 years, particularly when it's been in the hands of private developers, and this is a really good opportunity now to start getting people involved in some of the nitty-gritty of what delivering a project like this involves. And a Friends of group will open huge doors for the community with that. It'll allow them to apply for grant funding that would otherwise be outside of the scope of what could be brought to a project like this. It'll bring extra volunteering and third sector support in that we may not have otherwise been able to bring in. And it helps to deliver the master plan aspirations on there. I think one of the advantages that we've got now is having a draft master plan and hopefully very shortly a draft management plan. I think we're getting to a point where we're going to all be on the same page as to what the future of the British looks like, which is great because then we can all be working on that with the Friends of group to deliver it.
Just asking a question. Are there any groups you haven't consulted with hindsight that you should have?
I think we've certainly tried to consult everyone that came to mind from a planning perspective. I think with hindsight, we would probably have done and are now doing more with Natural Resources Wales to try and get them on board, not just from a phase 1 remediation side of things, but also from a future delivery of projects side of things. Some of the other environmental delivery bodies, I mentioned briefly a minute ago, organisations such as Groundworks. We haven't discussed projects with them. They're now bringing ideas to us, to the table, and it'll be good to engage with that as well. From a public engagement side of things, I think we've tried to cover off all of the different groups that we would want to do. There are some very specific action groups that we haven't yet consulted on. So things like disability access groups we haven't yet spoken to in the design of the master plan. But we certainly will by the time we get to looking at any technical detail on the projects. So that's certainly in our plan for consultation going forward.
Norma, do you want to ask question 5, please?
How are you using the knowledge, information or good practice of others to inform or influence your work?
So at the start of the project, we pulled together all of the existing data that we had on the site, and that had been gathered over a number of years. And we've reviewed as much of that data as we could. It's whatever filing systems that we have. We've then, and that's given us a good baseline of older data to use. We've then been out and spoken to the community and encouraged people to come and do walkarounds with us to identify hazards that they're aware of on the site. And it'd be great if people can continue to do that. I know the plea went out at the last liaison group meeting that if people are aware of any hazards on the site that they would like to see prioritised, to come and speak to us about things. It's always going to be a balancing act for us on something like this between taking the information that others have and relying on that to a certain degree with managing the liabilities that come to the council. And so there are some bits and pieces that we've had to either double check or get new information on in relation to, say for example, the watercourse system. We've had to go down and do fresh examinations of that, because even though we've got and have seen old photos of what those culvert systems look like, the condition of those now is very different to what the condition was 10 years ago. So it's a balancing act for us where people do have information, please do share it with us. We'll review all of that, and if we can rely on that, great. But there are going to be times where we need to review and spend a bit of money to assess things.
Can I come in first, no, please? In 1976, there was something like 56 working pits in Wales. So I suspect other councils have been dealing with these sorts of issues. Have there been any engagement with other councils about best practice from what they've done in terms of this type of scheme?
We haven't engaged with other councils. We have engaged considerably with the Coal Authority, because they are the experts, if you like, on this area. So one of the things that we've been doing recently is where we've had consultancy done, we've had the Coal Authority peer review that to check that they're comfortable with the approaches and the methodology that we're putting forward. I think one of our concerns and some of the hesitancy about approaching other councils is that a lot of that expertise has moved on in a lot of places now. Because the pit closures in most places were some time ago, that expertise has moved on. But more than happy to look into that.
Need to interrupt you, Norma. You can come in now.
I was going to ask the same question as actually have they been to other parts of the country, to see how they've handled these problems. You mentioned going out to consultations. You mean professional consultations? Now, the community group, local group, were they asked what they would like to see these consultees sort of put in their plans? Because that's what happens, isn't it? They do a plan of what they think should be happening. Were the group informed that this was happening and consulted before it happened?
So what we've done with this one is we've almost turned it on its head, and we've said this is a site that we now own. It's our responsibility to put a master plan in place for it. So we've been working on a master plan and gone out to these other organisations, people like CADU, for example, people like Natural Resources Wales, and said this is what we are looking to do. What are your thoughts and views on it? And what we're hoping is that we flush out any concerns that may then later crop up in the planning system when this comes through. And so far we haven't had any major issues or objections raised by those stakeholders, which is great. And that's then opened the doors to other opportunities for developing projects with those different organisations. But that draft master plan, that concept that went out to all these organisations, is exactly the one that we've been working with the community to pull together. So it was a case of pulling the ideas in from the first series of workshops we did, which was the visioning workshops, and then going out to these consultees and saying, this is our emerging thinking on this site, what are your thoughts? They've come back then with a few comments, which we've then fed back as best we can where there's constraints. We've then pulled together a master plan based on that initial vision and those initial project ideas, and we're just in the process, we've just sent that back out to these organisations now and said, thanks for your early comments where you did raise them. This is the stage that we're at now. Are there any opportunities for you to get involved, or do you have any major concerns with it? So that's how it's been iterative between the two.
Also, Councillor Parrish, I think in terms of, in terms of the use of consultants and the involvement of the local knowledge, as Dave has said, we've tried to pick on local knowledge, get what we can to then feed up into structural assessments. But actually, if we're putting a specification out for major construction work, the information in that specification has to be absolutely as robust as we can make it. We have a liability which we want to cover off, and there is a lot of expertise within that area. I was in the meeting the other week in August, and there was a disagreement between two different individuals on what happened on the site on a particular occasion. So sometimes we have to then take a consultant's view on what's going on that site to allow us to then make it. So when we're putting a specification together for multi-million pounds worth of expenditure, that we've got that absolute baseline, because we want the council protected. Because we do that when we have consultants brought on board under contract by us, we have public liability insurance covered through that path. So if we then act on their advice and their designs and their assessments and it proves to be flawed, the council has a legal recourse through which we can then take action if their advice was flawed. If we went on the views of Joe Bloggs, etc., we would then not have any legal indemnity. Should, and this is just a should, and I'm not saying that they are wrong on that site, and I'm sure they are 99% of the time right about what's gone on, but we've also got to protect the council when we're putting that. So I can tell, if we were going out to any contractor for building a work, the first thing they'd want is the technical assessment, and they would want that in a report done by somebody else they trust.
You raised a really interesting question, because one of the things that came up, and you've got obviously general officers in the council, and you've got professional officers, and one of the problems you've got, as you well know, is that some of them come to the end of their life and they know things about areas, and you've got some really good officers in that degree. And unfortunately, the question that we had here about knowledge, information, good practice, you raised an interesting question about your professional officers versus consultants, and you also raised the thing about knowledge of what happened 50 years ago, 20 years ago, and whatever, and it sounds absolute minefield. So what I'm intrigued about what you just said there, funnily enough, about would your professional officers and a consultant, who is the arbiter about for the council? Because, as you said, we've got an area there, 300 audit shafts, and you obviously got to map every single one of those and make a decision about that. And you've got professional officers, consultants, probably mining engineers from what remains of the coal board, etc., etc. And you think where my father lives in Cornwall, he's right next door to the last deep mine in Cornwall. Exactly the same problem, and I talked to Adrian Wilcox about that. He knows the same stuff as well. So that what we were asking that question for about practice all over Britain on this very subject, which is rather unique. It's not unique, but it's certainly one of the more unique things in this particular area about where we got best practice and where we get it from. That's why I asked the question. And the parallel was the canal, funnily enough, because you've got exactly the same problem there, which I'm well aware of.
I think it's fair to say, the team inside Torvine do not have, they have a high level of expertise in terms of engineering. We do not have a specialist mining engineer. Nor would we, nor should we. So therefore, we have to go out and seek that expertise to help us with this work.
On your head, so who does that?
Absolutely, yes.
Oh, okay.
As you're in full flow, can you ask question 6, please?
Okay. have you been surprised by any of the consultation responses, such as ideas if you've not already considered? This next one.
I think actually what I've been pleasantly surprised at, and I hinted at it earlier, is the robustness of the ideas that have come from the youth engagement sessions. And I suppose almost inevitably some of those are ideas that we hadn't initially started to think of. They do tie in very nicely with some of the project ideas that we have got in there. So for example, some of the walking trails, opportunities to turn those maybe into cycling trails as well. And so there are some things that had been in the back of our mind, but we didn't really know the level of priority that the community was attaching to it. And I think some of this youth engagement work has really shown that that cycling element has a much higher priority. I think some of the... I don't think it was a surprise to any of us that the consultation emphasised the heritage on the site and the importance of the heritage. But a lot of those consultation responses have been around stabilising that heritage as much as restoring it and having it as a feature in the landscape. And we have had ideas come through about cafes, and it is something that we'll actively explore. But I do think that there's an affinity with the heritage as is, to a degree, for some of the buildings on there, which is really good, and it's really positive and constructive there, that people aren't necessarily expecting wholesale restoration of some of the buildings on the site.
So the rave that happened there must have been a shock. Sorry, I only put that one in because that was a use you hadn't thought of, wasn't it? No, I don't think it. No, I only say because no, I know the local council.
It's on track.
No, I only make that thing because obviously the obvious one was back to nature, wasn't it, and uses out of that. And I only make the comment is previous remarks that there's a lot of expertise all over Wales on that department. Have you looked at that?
Yes, so in terms of taking things back to nature and the opportunities, this is one of the key areas that we're looking to work with Gwent Wildlife Trust on. It didn't come up in the discussion earlier, but the MOU that we have with Gwent Wildlife Trust brings them into the working group structures that we've got, so our project team. So they are seeing every design decision and taking part in every design decision that's been made where they attend those working groups. So there's a huge wealth of expertise that we're pulling in there. And the advantage of working with an organisation like that is they can pull in other expertise themselves. So already they've brought in people from coalfields, environmental groups, to start looking at some of the particular habitats that we might be looking to promote on the site. So I think as we start to move from this conceptual stage into the greater level of detail, these groups will now start to engage more, and we're certainly open to that.
We've got one last question to ask on engagement. Then I know the committee have got some concerns around funding, so we're going to cover some of the funding issues. We've then got a few questions. I'm just giving this a heads up to you two. We've got some questions around risks, and we're going to finish off with some questions on going forward. I'll just get the last question on engagement out of the way. How have the responses received during the consultation influenced progress?
I think when you asked earlier about is there anything we do differently with the consultation, one of the things that I would do exactly the same is run a series of consultation events, because what that's allowed us to do is consult on that high level vision for what the site is, and then consult on the specific projects. And during that high level vision consultation, we opened it out to the community and said, with these three elements in mind, creating a sustainable community, a dramatic natural landscape, and emphasising the historic character, what projects and land uses would you like to see that would fit that? We had a whole series of suggestions, and it's itemised in the report as to which ones of those we have been able to incorporate. But that's really driven our thinking in terms of what land uses and projects we've put in there. So, for example, a lot of the landscape management actions will be around creating new walking routes on the site. That has come directly out of that engagement that we've had. Things like bird hides being incorporated into that, and picnic tables, again, directly out of that engagement we've had. The heritage and what to do with that has come directly from that. And what we've done between having that those initial ideas coming through and the second consultation, where we presented the draft master plan, was worked with the working groups that we've got to to check those out and to check some of the viability. So are they things that we realistically think could be financed? This isn't all going to happen straight away. This is going to be a longer term master plan to deliver. But are they things that could potentially attract investment from the public or private sector? Could we potentially attract a partner to deliver and operate and run it? Do we need to attract a partner for this idea? So we've done all of that screening of those ideas, and that then really has driven that draft master plan that we're presenting today.
You've neatly got us into funding.
I think so, just on that, I just wanted to say, I think one thing I wanted to reflect on is that partnership working, it's not easy for all the people engaged in that partnership. I think particularly when you look at the history of this site and all that, the proposed developments, you know, I can understand why there's been a level of suspicion and unease. You know, that level of building trust takes time, and sort of like, you know, it hasn't been the easiest path at times for the community or for sort of like the councillors, I'd say. But I almost saw it as we saw, like, you go through a storming and forming and norming type process. And actually, I'm hoping that the development of this master plan, which is completely which has completely come from the engagement, will now help, I think, get us into the norming phase where we've got more of a level of trust. We've put in the appropriate boundaries around those relationships for greater transparency. But I've no doubt that there'll always be hiccups through the process, or things might change in unease. The most important thing is that absolute commitment from ourselves that we will keep on talking and working in the way we have already is most important, and we do what we say we're going to do as well.
Thank you for that, Rachel. We will move on to funding now. And Giles, would you like to ask the first question, please?
Do we have enough money to carry out the necessary remediation works if this is the only funding we have available?
Okay, so in terms of the remediation side of it, which is just one part of the master plan going forward, what was reported to council was that we look to address the highest risk shafts and adits and watercourses on the site. So we've gone through a concept design stage, if you like, as to how we're going to do those two, and a part of that has involved risk ranking the shafts and adits on the site. And giving them then a prioritisation based on that risk as to which ones we're going to be in a position to treat. The records show a considerable number of shafts and adits on that site, over 100, but through this process we found some of those are double mapped, some of them aren't visible at surface, so we've been able to weed out some of those. This is one of the areas where the community engagement has been really important, because working with the liaison group, they have made it clear that it's potentially a lower priority to address some of those shafts and adits than to address the water flow issues on the site. Now we've got to sense check that, like Rachel was saying earlier, in terms of where the liability sits on that, but it's certainly changed our thinking around how we focus and prioritise when we're balancing these risks out. On the water, so on the shafts and adit side, the cost expectation on that has come down. On the water side, it's gone up because we've redirected some of that money from shafts and adits into looking at the watercourse. I think it's safe to say that the costs are higher than we'd originally anticipated. There wasn't a concept level design at that stage that had a detailed cost associated to it, and we've tried to incorporate features like the ponds into the watercourse system, partly as a way of holding up water, but partly as a way of creating a community feature. So it's always going to be a balancing act for us. Where we've reduced the scope now is we've taken out two of the other watercourses where the works aren't as higher priority. So the Cumbergan watercourse, which is the one that runs at the bottom end of the site, isn't crossing over areas where people tend to walk, and the culverts along that one are in much better condition. So we conducted a culvert survey. We identified where the worst of the culverts were and where the longest stretches of culverting were, because that's the greatest risk from the council's point of view, and that's where the liability sits, and we focused on those areas. So now the costings that we've got, and these costings will need to be reviewed all the way through the process, but the costings that we've got at the minute are for prioritised shafts and adits, for the watercourse that goes down the eastern side of the site, with the creation of two ponds on there. What we'll need to do, as I say, is as we go into the technical design, the materials that the channel will be built from, the exact distance from bank to bank and base to base, for example, those costs will change as we go through that, and it'll be part of our role to see what can and can't be brought in to the scheme when we do that review. So as things stand, the costs, the funding is there for that programme.
Is there any way available to actually look how much has been spent on site up to date, or is that still confidential? Because I know we started off with around 3.1 million. We're 2 years in, just to see how much has actually been spent, how much we've got left to finish off this work.
Yeah, can certainly review the figures through the working group. That isn't an issue. We've purposely tried not to spend considerable amounts of money where we don't need to in terms of the prep and design work. So the biggest item of expenditure so far was the purchase of the site. And the sort of administration and the initial consultancy on the site is in the low, sort of, some of the commissions we put out are about 50 or 60,000, for example, and we've probably done 2 or 3 of those. So we'll get the exact figures and we'll go through those, but I do want to reassure the group that we're nowhere near eating into the amount of money that's available. The bulk of this money will be on the capital spend.
The chair of the British Liaison Group said to us that they didn't feel the priority in terms of liability was with the shafts. He was telling us about watercourse sitting underneath the tip was a great priority. Do you agree with that?
From my point of view, from a personal point of view, I do. But we always have to be stirred by what the technical advice is coming back to us as to where those liabilities lie. So yes, that's exactly why we've reprioritised to address that watercourse going down the eastern side of the site, rather than focusing on some of the shafts and adits. Ultimately, once we get on site and start to fill in some of the shafts and adits where they are open, and there are some clear examples of open shafts on the site, we'll have to keep constantly re-evaluating that because we don't know exactly what we'll find.
We also have to think about the future. We want more people to go onto this site. We want more use of the site, which means therefore we need to make the site safer than potentially it is now. Okay, because that's why we're spending money now, so we haven't got to go back in 15, 20 years' time to do that same work again.
Move on. Alan, do you want to ask the next question, which is number 2, underfunded, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. What discussions have we held on future funding, perhaps with other funding bodies?
So we've already submitted an expression of interest to CADU for some funding to stabilise the listed structures there. Essentially, that's a matter for them as to whether they have funding at the end of the year. There's no prescribed or existing funding pot that we're bidding into there. But we've put that marker in the sand to say if there is funding available, we would like it for this scheme, and we've outlined what that scheme is with them. We're also constantly in close liaison with Welsh Government around opportunities from both their regeneration teams and their environment teams as well. And they've pointed us towards some funding sources that Natural Resources Wales may now have. So we're seeking a further meeting with NRW to talk about some of the opportunities there. A lot of the projects that we've included in the master plan could have a heavy volunteer input as well, which is exactly why we're so pleased and so supportive of the concept of a Friends of the British group, because they'll be able to actively get involved in that, which of course opens doors in terms of match funding to schemes as well. So we've started to explore those. In reality, the focus for us has to be on the remediation works, the funding that we've got available at this stage. But that balance will shift as we progress through the project and as those works get more in depth.
The funding's interesting. She did Natural Resources Wildlife. I mean, I go to biodiversity meetings. I was at one of the meetings yesterday. Assuming that this whole site is going to be some sort of green thing without the rest of it, because it's what we've been talking about. Looking at your vision 20 years on, I also sit somewhere else where we talk about these sort of things. You're looking at woodland, looking at water. You're going to change what you got up there quite dramatically if you start doing this with it. what are they going to pay for? Are they going because obviously at the moment you've got kind of blank canvas, haven't you, in terms of wildlife? Is it keeping some of what you've got, which is heathland, and I'm looking at the biodiversity up there, because if you talk to people like Steve Williams, they like some of what you've got, which is Old Colliery site, but once you start putting woodlands in and ponds in, I'm only asking what they're paying for.
We are going to pick up on the biodiversity and the risk. So
I know that, but we're looking at it in terms of finances. National Resources Wales wants something, then you've got to be clear. You've got a risk thing, and you've also got what they're going to pay for. Cost money.
So in terms of that side of it, a lot of the actions within that will be picked up within the landscape management plan. And a lot of the activities within that won't be particularly expensive. It'll be volunteer activities to clear bracken, which will be cost neutral in most cases. Gwent Wildlife Trust will step in and support where they need training and tools and equipment for volunteers on that as well. And it'll be that landscape management plan, to answer the point around engagement with Steve, that dictates what each area should have. Steve sits on the working groups, so he's fully involved in the project, and we're working that landscape management plan up with the ecologists to make sure that we're not just turning the whole site to woodland, we're focusing on each individual area and saying what should that area look like, and that's the approach we've taken.
Obviously, at the moment, what you've got is acidic woodland with the, if I remember rightly, I've seen some of it. You've got acidic woodland, old coal measures, obviously renaturing, to use George, what's his name, Monet's thing. You bring in stuff will naturally come in, and you're getting rid of. So if you're taking the bracken out, you're going to get less acidic landscaping. Trees come in, lots of things happen, don't they? So it's not, it would quite significantly change, very similar to the heritage landscape.
Each area will be taken on its merits. So, for example, if we're taking bracken away from an area that's got an underlying heathland nature, we may also look to remove some of the scrub that's developed on it. That will be ecologically driven, with a view also to looking at what uses people are going to be doing in the area. But the ecology will be key. So it won't all be allowed to turn to scrub and bracken control. And bracken control will only be done in certain areas where we feel it's a priority as well.
But you raised the next question, which is 3 under fund on pre-scrutiny. So can you ask this one, please?
Yeah. Are there any commercial opportunities available in relation retention of the old buildings on site? And I won't do the obvious one there, right? There are obviously quite a lot there. We saw them when we went round there on planning fund, you know.
So yes, there are a lot of listed buildings on site, and the condition of them has deteriorated. And I think it was made clear in the report when it went to council that the actual addressing of those structures isn't something that we could do with the funding that we've got available. One of the things that we've done, we secured some additional funding from the Rural Development Programme to look at an options appraisal for the engine house and the NCB coal board offices on there to see what could be done. And they essentially scored a whole series of options that could be put out to the private sector or the third sector to invest in. So they've done that approach. Unfortunately for us, as things stand at the minute based on current usage, there isn't great viability for some of those. Now, if we can get the usage up by encouraging people to use the walking routes that we put in, then that viability may shift and we may get private sector involvement in it. So it's going to have to be an iterative process that we do the bits we can that don't need a commercial element to them to boost the viability of the bits that could have a commercial element.
Sure. Are we looking at tourism? Are we and use around that, or are we looking at manufacture and that sort of thing?
So we're looking at facilities such as cafes. I mean, from our point of view, we don't have a budget to be promoting tourism. That budget no longer exists. And so to promote the site for tourism is going to be very difficult. Now, we've borne that in mind when we developed the master plan and when we developed the brief for the RDP project, and we've asked them to assess viability based on local use. So it will be an increasing number of local people from within the sort of Torfaen area coming up to use the site in the same way that people use local nature reserves, for example. But from a tourism promotion perspective, the budget no longer exists to do that.
The final question on funding, please.
Sure, thank you, Chair. What will happen to the site if funds can't be accessed after phase 1 is completed?
So part of the work that we're doing on the landscape management plan is assessing every single area on that site as to what landscape could occur within that area. And what that gives us scope to do is look at getting some volunteer activities going now across the site in various areas. If some of the proposals that we're talking about don't come forward, so for example, a heritage trail cafe doesn't come forward, then the landscape management plan activities would step in around removing some of the vegetation from those buildings and removing some of the bracken in the area to make them more attractive as a general landscape. So there are landscape management measures that can be put in place to control that if we don't secure funding to deliver the rest of the master plan.
One thing I think I want to point out is that this is a long-term, the site is now the council's, it has a long-term duty of care for it, so there might not be funding opportunities in the next 5-10 years, but there might be in 15 or 20 years, so it's having that long-term perspective for that site, just like we have in Blaenavon, with, it's iterative, it's long-term, things will evolve, and funding opportunities will change. Most important things that the team and all the partners around there are keeping their eyes and ears open for any possible opportunity that might arise. And sometimes we might have to skew our plans to fit a funding stream, because not always the funding streams do exactly what we want them to do. And God only knows what Welsh Government are going to be doing with their future schemes, or NRW or HLF or CADU. We just have to sometimes respond to those very quickly, but the fact is we've probably got more than a lot of people to put things forward should grants regimes change.
Follow up. Yeah, I did. I actually wanted to go back a step, and my apologies for that. On the commercial side, one of my favourite projects out of the borough is that of Kennan Renewables in Bridgend, where they have a renewable facility. They're engaged with universities and schools, and a fantastic site up there where it encourages people to go and visit to see how renewable energy is generated. I think that kind of model would work well at the British, and I just wanted to make the point before we moved on that I think that's something that should be considered. That might attract additional funding.
Completely agree. So one of the things in the master plan that we've allocated space for is for renewable energies. If that came about and we were able to deliver that component of the master plan, that may unlock future uses for some of the buildings as a demonstrator. Now, with that in mind and that master plan vision in mind, we've already started engaging with Cardiff University on various parts of the project to try and build up those relationships. So the planning students come up now, it's incorporated into one of the modules within the university from a planning perspective, the British is. Earth sciences students come up and look at the geology on the site. And I'm hoping that in the near future we'll be able to get some mapping of the mine workings done, some 3D mapping with the university as well. So we're trying to build these relationships to the point where we can have a steering group, if you like, within the university, so that when opportunities do emerge from the master plan, we've got the contacts to go straight in and say, this is here, do you want to work with us on it?
Very quickly, I'm mindful of the fact that the other player that we're not even thinking about, which might public service one, the health authority, they're keen to get people out, to strike one that's an opportunity we could look at, healthy walking, biking, whatever. That site's huge, it's one of the biggest sites we've got in the borough, and they might be persuaded to do that. Also, with our lack of any tourism infrastructure, I believe it's been delivered by the Welsh Tour. They obviously got to be a partner. Then at a micro level, which are our friends the community councils again, isn't it? Looking at that's a partnership that we need to look at in some ways.
So our main contact within Welsh Government is with the regeneration team, but based on their recent sort of changes in structure and with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, their role has changed slightly and they're now a conduit to all sorts of other departments. So if we go to the regeneration team within Welsh Government, we would expect them now to be talking to the environment team, the projects infrastructure team, and to tourism as well. So those conversations will already be happening within Welsh Government, and they have seen a copy of the draft master plan and have already started to put leads our way from that.
Move on now to risks. Alan, can you ask the first question on risks, please?
Yes, Chair, thanks. I think you may have answered this, or probably answered 75% of it anyway. But the principal hazards remaining after remediation works, are there any risks that you're concerned about that you may not be able to mitigate? And what impact would this have?
There will be risks associated with the site, and I think when we applied to Welsh Government for funding, we did put an option to them for additional funding to be able to address even more of those risks, and that wasn't an option that was taken forward, and that was all outlined when the report came into council. Off the back of that, it does mean that there will be some shafts and adits remaining on the site, at least ones that show up on historic maps of the site. Now, for a lot of these, they're not visible at surface. You can't see any signs of them. Doesn't mean that they're not necessarily underground, but it means that you can't see them. So they're a lower priority hazard in the risk ranking work that's been done for us by our consultants. But nonetheless, we would need to be mindful that those hazards still could appear in future. The other area with potential risk is around the remaining culvert network. So we've always looked at the site of everything below Farm Road, essentially, which is where the water enters into big culverts, long 200, 300, 400, 500 metre culverts. There are a series of bridges and smaller culverts further upstream that may come with maintenance liabilities that we need to factor in. And it's always been a statement in the work that we've done that there may be implications from a maintenance perspective that need to be factored in to medium-term financial plan for things like those existing culverts. So that there are risks associated with that from a flood risk perspective. Now that said, what we have done is we've instigated a risk assessment process here where we review what the risk is, we identify what it is, we see whether there's anything that we can do straight away with the budget that we've got available. And that might be as simple as fencing and signing things off, which is what we've done in a lot of instances. If that's not possible, we look at whether it can be accommodated within the remediation concept that we've got, and that's very much dependent on the funding that's available. And if we can't do those, then we have a monitoring regime in place for those risks to try and keep an eye to see what level that risk is at. And that monitoring regime involves officers making regular visits to the site to look at each of those hazards that have been identified where we can visibly see them.
As well as the technical risks, I think that there's also the reputational risk and how we keep on working. And obviously one of our biggest risks is if we don't do what we're saying we're going to do, particularly with the British Liaison Group and the new Friends of and all the partners. So that's and that's just as important as the technical and health and safety risk as well. So I think, it's us being aware of that. I see that as very much my role, because I challenge Dave and say, what's this, why have you done that? Because I'm sort of just trying to be, that sort of person who can act as an intermediary as we go through that partnership process. So I think we've got technical risks, which then health and safety is absolutely paramount. It is our site, we are responsible. The last thing we want is a serious accident on that site, so we've got to try and make it safe, whilst also reputationally on that risk delivering what we say we can deliver in the spirit in which we say we're going to do it.
Yeah, if I could please, Chair. Just back to Dave a minute. You brought up the subject of maintenance then, which I wasn't thinking about originally, but in the initial report to Council in 2016, it said that if the site was remediated, and that was all that was done, that the ongoing costs of maintenance would be in the hundreds and not the thousands. Is that still correct?
I think that's likely to be the case until we've done the landscape management plan and finalised that, and until we finalise the remediation detailed design. it'll be impossible to say exactly what that is, to quantify it exactly. What we do at the minute is we sort of monitor it as we're going through that design process. But I think that's highly likely. What we're talking about here is removing debris from culverts. We're talking about visual monitoring checks of shafts and adits. So the maintenance side of those risks is likely to be fairly low, but I'd want the reassurance of the plans before we finalise that. The issue for us is just to be aware that there are still risks on that side that we do have to monitor and manage going forward.
Thank you, Chair. More of a general question. In terms of risk management, does your organisation have a risk management process that you need to follow, which would produce a risk management plan with the mitigating actions? It's kind of ongoing. You do. Okay, that's answered that one. And the second part of that question is on the flip side. Do you have an opportunity exploitation plan that would go alongside it? Because I think a lot of the work that you've done clearly highlights potential, but it's almost too much. And I think it would be a good idea if it's collated in one place and monitored in the same way as the risks are, so that you can effectively, management process.
So we do, yes. What we monitor as the project management team there is two separate things. One is the risk, which I'll outline how we do that, which ties into the general corporate management of risk. The other is we maintain a very detailed issues log. And that issues log will look at any negative issues that crop up, things where, for example, we might need to invest a bit more money. But it also logs every single opportunity that comes up from partnership working or where we've got projects in development. And what we do monthly is we update that, and it throws up a series of actions. So we do that through the working groups. We will feed back through the working groups, and we'll feed back to the project board on what those opportunities are as well.
Also, corporately, there is a risk management process within the council. I'm sort of looking at Kath because she leads it, where risks at a departmental level are quantified, go into a corporate risk assessment, which are monitored by audit. This project also reports into the capital board in terms of monitoring the expenditure and the risks from a financial profile as well. So yes, there is a risk management framework in place. In terms of opportunity framework, I think the development framework is our master plan for the opportunities.
I make a sort of broader point, because as I sit on allotments and I sit on canal, we've got a landscape which this is part of. The top end of the valley in Blaenavon, you've got old coal tips, you've got allotment up there, had water coming underneath. Mark was trying to find that water there. You go further down the valley, you've got other old coal tips, and you've got water courses go feeding into the canal on the river, and you come all the way down to Hentles, you've got another old coal. So we've got this kind of risk of all its water courses, etc. Some feeding into the river, some feeding under Cwmbran, for instance. There's lots and lots of streams and drains. So that risk assessment you've got in the landscape all the way through. And we had that famous flood, didn't we, back about 5 years ago, was it? Where everything went. Do you know about this? Well, they did a risk assessment on that, and Cwmbran councillors know that one well. Where certain people popped up and protested about flood risk, etc., etc. So this isn't. Part of your corporate thing takes on board what the NCB. Old NCB tips all over the place, ex-quarries, hillsides that do this. So I wonder whether this is any more. This is a more extreme version of that, but where it fits into corporate risk for us as a council, you've got a lot on your plate on that one. But is it any more or less worse than some of the stuff that you've got up at Blaenavon? I'm only asking that question.
So I think if I could just sort of make a general point on that, there was a land purchase here, and not all of the risks elsewhere on watercourse systems and tips would sit with the council, so those liabilities wouldn't necessarily lie with the council. On this site they do. And what we've also got on this site is the benefit of a significant number of years' worth of information that says those risks are deteriorating and some of the conditions of those systems are deteriorating. So we know that there are some actions that we need to do on this site. And the watercourse realignment going down the eastern side to take it out of that culvert network is one of those big risks, because we know from the surveys that have been done in that network that there are collapses in there that need to be rectified as part of a remediation scheme. So we do have a particular level of interest and risk on this one because of that land purchase.
Thank you for that, because, you know, as I said, that puts it in context. I know you've got flood prevention schemes and various things you do elsewhere, but that does put it in context. But we do elsewhere have this, but it comes back to my worry about how many officers we got in the council monitoring this stuff, and I think we need to flag that up as well, because you're in place at the moment, you've got the knowledge and you're developing the knowledge, and with other officers who specialist job is doing that. So obviously you liaise with them, I assume, very strongly. Good.
Thank you for that, Stuart. Stuart, I want you to ask the next question, because I think it's about biodiversity action plans, and we've touched on it already, so you can ask it and do any follow-up, please.
So, do you have biodiversity action plans in place to help identify biodiversity risks?
I think the landscape management plan will pick up on a lot of these, to be honest. So that is already in development at the minute, that landscape management plan. And as I say, that will focus on each individual area. The other piece of work that we've done, we've commissioned ecological survey work in advance of any capital works that we'll be doing on the site to create the watercourses. Until we have the technical design, exactly where earth will be moved, exactly what distances, we can't do a full ecological impact assessment. But the species that will be affected, we are now aware of because we've done that survey work. So by the time we come to commence any capital works, we'll have a detailed ecological impact assessment. And as I say, sitting along that on the more positive side of things, we'll have the landscape management plan that will direct where any habitat improvements can take place.
I mean, I did touch on it before, and if you go up to the World Heritage Site, I've been on several Steve's trips around the place, and they're absolutely brilliant. And I think this, bearing in mind what you're proposing in terms of management, is really, really exciting part of this if it goes to plan. And you said you don't need a lot. You sit it there and let it mature to a large extent. And I just think it'd be really exciting. And that's what's really good about this. But providing you do the rest of it. And bearing in mind what's happened with 200 years worth of Blaenavon, you know, these old sites, they do generate a whole lot of ecology, which is quite amazing.
The timeline shows that you're currently within timescales. What happens between now and the time you submit the master plan to Cabinet, and when is that likely to be?
So there's a couple of things that we need to do with the master plan going forward. The master plan will form part of a document called a development framework, which is very, very unhelpfully called that because of the issues that it's caused at the start of the project, but nonetheless that's what the document's called. And that will outline how the land uses on the British relate to the constraints that we've identified through the remediation scheme. That development framework then will be one of the documents that we submit when we apply for planning consent to do the remediation works. And that's a requirement of the LDP as it stands currently, that we submit that development framework with the first planning application for the British site, essentially to show why the works that we're doing on there are necessary to enable the landform that we're talking about, that the LDP was talking about, but now that's been captured in the master plan that we're presenting. So it will have to go through that planning process, and the master plan will be submitted within that. And we're expecting that to happen, a submission to happen within the next 6 to 9 months. That's our aim, if we can get all of the technical work done within that timescale. It may be the case that we bring the master plan to Cabinet sooner than that, with the caveat that it will be subject to any recommendations that come out of the planning process. But it will go hand in hand with that process.
Finally, off me, is completion date of 2023. Are you confident, or partly confident, that it will be completed and handed over by then?
It seems realistic, based on the nature and the level of works that we have to do. There's always a big caveat at this stage in the design process, which is that as we progress through into the technical detail, and to a greater extent once we get onto site, There are always risks with projects that you'll find something unknown and you'll have to adapt the scheme to work around that, and that will take time. But based on the programme as it stands at the minute and the proposed works, I don't see any issues with meeting that timescale.
I'll ask the next question, please.
Oh, sorry, I'll have to do it again. How will you communicate the outcome of this meeting and the next steps to interested parties?
So we will be organising a series of our working groups. We have 4 working groups essentially. We have one that looks at monitoring the site, which is the risk management side of things. We have one that looks at the master plan. We have one that looks at the remediation works themselves, and then we have one that's looking at the landscape management plan. We'll convene a meeting of all of those working groups, because I think the discussion we've had today may potentially have implications for each of those working groups, and we'll feed back through them. And those working groups will have a representative, at least one representative from the liaison group sitting on those, as well as the other stakeholders within the council, Gwent Wildlife Trust as well. We'll update the master plan with any issues that we need to take on board after this discussion. So that will go back out to the funding stakeholders and the planning stakeholders, if you like. So that'll be people like Welsh Government, CADU, NRW. And then we'll do some communications as well, working with the liaison group and the Front of the British group. I suspect what it'll be is a piece of work that will go on the Facebook page for the liaison group then to publicise that out. We then intend to do a final series of workshops once the technical design work has been done on the watercourse route, just in case there's any changes to the nature of where that route goes. At the minute, what we said at the consultations is this is the concept, this is what we want to deliver. There are risks, and as we go through technical design, we'll have to accommodate that. So we like to do another series of workshops with that final design before we go out to build as well. So that'll be an opportunity for us to convey that even wider at that point.
Next question, because I think you touched on this, Rachel, earlier about local development plans, etc. Is it about vision, really? I won't be here to question this in time. What impact is this likely to have the master plan in 10 or 20 years' time? It's not a job in you.
You sure? I think, that we have a master plan in terms of, I think, there is a direct correlation there. We are in an LDP review process. So how this master plan sits into the LDP and how it's taken forward through that process, I think is a very interesting conversation to have, because Welsh Government, whereas before the British site was in the LDP because it was seen as a strategic area, Welsh Government have changed their parameters that sites can only be in an LDP now if they are viable for development, and we haven't done any of that work yet. We are not being approached by developers left, right and centre for development work. So I think its place within the LDP is one that will be reviewed through the LDP process. I think in terms of the vision for the future, I suppose part of my job is ensuring that we've got the infrastructure within the council that no matter who is in post, because we have to sort of future-proof and have that resilience as well, that we're able to take this project forward. And we have the necessary skills and knowledge. I think, Councillor Patch made a good point. Dave has this knowledge at the moment. I hope Dave stays with us and continues this. But we need to share that knowledge and spread that knowledge for future resilience and taking it forward. As I said, this is not a quick, short project. This doesn't finish in 2023 with the water being done. It's a long-term project, which might, and I think the one thing we need to be is flexible, as I said, to adapt to changing circumstances, to changing needs, to changing community aspirations, because they might want something different in 10, 20, 30 years' time. And so I think that's the important thing, is just that framework and that mindset about how this project's taken forward, because we don't know what is going to be available 30 years in time.
It's just one point. The British Liaison Group, and you've mentioned development again there, they were very strong in making the point to us that they've been fighting the idea of development. So how are you going to square that circle when you develop the revised LDP? I don't know the answer.
I think that's a conundrum for any site normally around the borough, isn't it? You know, it's not unique to the British. You know, we have this almost, you know, in the north of the borough, we have very little land suitable for development. There is a link between development and economic growth. You know, but we also have balancing acts to play in terms of impacts on local facilities, on the infrastructure, and what a site can and cannot, you know, cope with, and also what the local community can cope with in terms of impact on, I said, school places, etc. So, you know, given it's one of the few last sites within the north, I think, you know, we don't have master plans for hundreds and hundreds of houses. I think, you know, we can definitely, and that is shown by the map, it is much smaller areas. But at the moment, it is in terms of our responsibility for future generations to keep our options open and not close the door now, because, you know, in a few years' time, you know, there might be a need for housing in that area, or for a form of, I don't know, I'm going to say it, light commercial industrial. We don't know. All we're doing is, through the master plan, creating an opportunity, should it be the right opportunity. And obviously that's where the planning process comes in, to make sure that if an opportunity comes forward, or a proposal, I would say, comes forward, we make sure it's the right one for that site.
Yeah, more of a statement from me, really. This small question of what impact this is likely to have in 10 or 20 years is the crux of everything that's gone before it. We've talked an awful lot about the history of the site, and it's all to do with the future of maintaining what we currently have there. And I think your statement is the right one, keeping all options open, but doing it now with the support of a very strong local group, that we need to obviously make sure their feelings are considered at every step, as we do develop the site going into the next 10 and 20 years.
Thank you.
Do you want to touch on the last question? Because in a way, my question now hinges on that.
You can ask the questions.
I'll ask that.
I rather like it. Has it ever been considered that once the remediation work has been completed, that you just leave the site as it is?
There's a reason I'm going to comment after that.
I think what I would do is take us back to what those aspirations were in that business plan that went to Welsh Government. So if we were to leave the site as it was, had we appropriately managed health and safety risks? Potentially, to a degree, we will have done. Will we have enhanced environmental resilience by safeguarding and improving biodiversity? Potentially not, because without that landscape management plan in place to take action where the ecologists are recommending it, we may not hit that objective to the best of our ability. Have we strengthened the aspirations of communities to provide opportunities for future generations? Impossible to say at the minute what those future generations are going to be, but that's why we'd have that flexibility within the master plan. Have we supported health and wellbeing goals to improve green infrastructure? No, we won't have put that infrastructure in. Those walking routes, those cycling routes won't exist. Have we protected and promoted heritage and culture? Not at all. That heritage and culture will continue to deteriorate. Have we unlocked opportunities for investment in jobs and growth? We won't have. Have we unlocked opportunities for future housing? We won't have. And will we have unlocked opportunities for green energy? We won't have. So without the delivery of the master plan or landscape management plan or some combination of them, it will be difficult to achieve those regeneration objectives.
Very good answer, but one of the elements that you've got in there, like the green and cleaning element of it, the nature reserve bit of it, and those bits, then you're going down the lines of biodiversity and all the rest of it, and why it's there. You're then getting something quite similar to what we get elsewhere in Wales, of why people bring some sort of green lung bit, which is probably what it's whether you ever get housing or businesses in there, probably is further down, and you rather demonstrated that today, I think. That's what I was going to say. Thanks, Chair. I was interested in this question, and I mean, I don't really want to go back to 2016. I want to say where we are now, because if you look at the situation in 2016, a number of issues have already knocked some of those things off the table. And I'm just trying to look at some of the logic around what we're doing with this. And I just wonder whether or not we should just say, well, let's clean and green it and have a wildlife park, nature park, wherever you want to, for the group to use that live in the area and from outside people who want to go and use that facility, but really put some of the development back with the British group. They have a strong group that's been going for a long time, for them to come forward with some suggestions in time. But if you have a look now, there are financial constraints on the council, which won't be gone in the foreseeable future next fall. We know that's not going to happen. We've got infrastructure issues with roads leading into there, and will we have the money to alter lots of that? So should we be dragging a lot of traffic up a pretty congested, narrow area already? There are actually a low number of jobs, and some of them are low skilled, sat within the proposals that are there. The future maintenance costs, if it was just cleaned and greened, are pretty low. We've just discussed that one there. And there are a number of existing projects of a commercial nature, like with TCPC, which they still having to finance because they can't stand on their own 2 feet, or they regress from the original business plan. So there's a lot of dangers around there and a lot of risks around there. So, I mean, I hesitate to say it, but should we kick this into the long grass and just leave this into clean and green and develop that, and then look in the future, maybe 5, maybe 10 years' time, to do something, but not miss opportunities as and when they arise to do something else, but perhaps with the people who live there, lead in the way on that mostly. I just wonder whether we should think about that and leave some of the other work.
I think, if you kicked it into the long grass, that normally means resources get put elsewhere, who then don't keep their eye on those opportunities that may come up. You'd put the liaison group wouldn't have somebody to liaise with, because resources would be redeployed. So my view is, this is a strategic project of the council. Yes, we've got this initial push of major investment and cleaning and greening, but in terms of what I understand from community and council aspirations is that this will be a project and a site which has a place and role within the team for the foreseeable future, rather than up to 2023. Because you've heard it with tourism. Because that's what happens. Posts will go, or priorities will change, and we wouldn't be able then to respond to those opportunities. I think even cleaning and greening. This is the first phase of some major capital works, but actually there's more effort needed to do all of that school engagement, that university engagement, to get the young people on there, to get the cycling routes, to get the walking routes, to get that engagement into health. I can see the role of the team and the liaison group and the friends of group as changing constantly as we evolve forward. But I think the aspirations are so great for what that site can offer in terms of community benefit. We're going to have to continue to have a role and resources put into it.
Yes, sorry, I didn't suggest, or maybe I did I placed the question, that resource disappears. It's there, it's ongoing, it's doing work now, but right now, for the foreseeable future, all we concentrate on is delivering that nature wildlife park, which is strongly backed by the residents who live around there. They're very much in favour of that. The other things can come later, and I think you've got more of a chance of buying them then if you've got that close relationship. We have delivered what we said we're going to deliver, and the other things they have a strong involvement with as and when they come up.
I think it's important as well to keep referring back to this being a master plan for the future. And I think unless there is something there now that sets out the opportunities, it doesn't mean we have to explore all of those opportunities now. It could be that some of those opportunities are explored further down the line, 10, 15 years down the line. But without them being part of a broader master plan, it'll be difficult for us to argue how the sum of all of these different elements contributes to what that overall vision was. So there's definitely scope for looking at how these projects might be phased and how different bits are done, certainly. But it depends on what that overall vision is. And when we did the consultation, the feedback, when we've done the online consultation and the sessions, has largely been positive of that overall concept that we put forward.
One thing we also have to, if we're going for funding, most funding bodies are now looking for holistic strategies which meet multiple outcomes in terms of alignment with well-being and future generations. So if we just focus on one aspect and not the holistic, we are potentially damaging our ability to secure further funding.
I didn't have my mic on then. I'd just like to let the committee members know that there were no comments received on the master plan on Facebook, so I won't be reading any of them out today. Now, we've been going for just over 2 hours. Do you want a 5-minute comfort break? Does anyone need... We'll carry on. So the next step now is for us to ask members for your thoughts on formulating our recommendations. Yeah, and I've just been reminded of the key question is, what is the outcome of the public consultation on the master plan? How have the responses influenced progress, and how do you intend on delivering the ongoing management of the master plan? That was what we were asked to scrutinise. Thoughts on recommendations? Alan?
My basic thoughts is, Chair, I don't think there's too much we can recommend. To be fair, I think we've done a pretty decent all-round job.
Yes.
We might not agree with some elements of the cost there, but I think they've communicated well. Please, they've established a good relationship with the British group now. There are other people they're talking to. I thought we had some good answers to some of our questions from there, and I think it's very difficult to find some other ways that they could go. You can argue, as I say, one way or another about some issues, but I mean, my feeling is it's still pushing, towards lots of these other bits of development instead of concentrating on the knitting and, say put on the back burner. It's not to forget them. It's just to say this is what we can do. Let's communicate that, because otherwise people think these developments will happen next year, the year after. People have a short-term view, but I think generally, they are getting out there and talking to people and getting some good feedback, which we heard today.
I tend to agree with those views, Alan. The one thing I did think was, and we pressed them a few times, when they develop the local development plan, the new one, there has to be detailed consultation with the community. So I think that would be, because this seemed to be a great weight by officers on the local development plan. So that's a key element, and the British Liaison Group made the point to us about it's not about consultation now over a summer, it's ongoing, and I think that's a recommendation I suggest. Jason?
I wanted to agree with Alan, really. I think David, the project manager, did an exceptional job today. Some of his answers were really, really good, and I certainly learned a tremendous amount about what's going on at the site and what has gone on. But I agree with comments already made in regards to making sure that the community group is first and foremost in terms of consultation, and their views are taken on board at every step of whatever the next projects or changes are to the site.
I agree with the last two speakers 100%. They have to keep in mind what the local people want and need from that site, and what happens later then will follow, how can I say, in a logical manner if they listen to what's going on. Because the people we've interviewed this afternoon, they know exactly what their vision is for that site, and we don't want to lose sight of that as a council, to keep that in mind and keep working with them.
I think the vision of the local group is excellent. They've been at it a long time. There were a lot of fights and lumpiness. They've got the council on board at leadership level, and officers have got a master plan, and it's not always what the local. I got the impression that it wasn't always what the word development is a sticking point. We've got what we got, and there's going to be some elements of that are not going to be quite what people want. That would, and we got those 7 elements. Was it, Giles? Yeah, 7 elements, and it's obvious that the bit of it that works for me, and I think probably works for a local group in the community, is the business, the cleaning and greening element of it, and nobody seems quite happy about the housing element, but that's something right in the future. It's not very real, but the element, it's like the Blaenavon Lake Garden Lakes type of setup, which is what we're really looking at. Yeah, can I just finish a minute? That element's real. What Jason was saying about the possibility of using some of the buildings and some commercial aspects is something that's realisable. So there's got a lot of real stuff in there. I don't think the houses certainly are, but elements of that, it's a very real project. But I still emphasise, I agree with what colleagues are saying all along here about it needs to have community involvement, community buy-on, and keep the group on board. But there's still going to be elements of this where they're not going to agree with each other. I'd say that.
That's Stuart. I think that point's well made by a number of members of the committee. Yeah. So, James, Giles, sorry.
I agree with everything that's been said. At the end of the day, the liaison group, well, the British liaison group and the Friends of the British are key to all of this, and we mustn't have any breakdown in communications like in the past. We've all got to work together now. They've got to be involved all the way. And at the end of the day, they're a strong group and they speak for the community. So I think that's key to all this working and going through smoothly, is to listen to what the community wants and to be involved all the way through.
The mood of the committee is we don't need to make a string of recommendations on this. We've had a very good feedback from the British Liaison Group and from the officers. If we really come up with one or two key recommendations, and Cathy, you want to come in with something else?
Yeah, if you don't mind me coming in on this one, there was one other thing that I sort of, as I go along, I sort of mark things that might want to come up at the end. Quite a few times throughout the meeting there were some concerns raised about the loss of information and knowledge due to issues of losing staff, and about planning for business continuity. And I know that you're never going to be in a situation where you can guarantee that you're always going to keep your staff. People will leave, people will retire. But, evidence has shown today that there have been some hurdles in this process as a result of staff leaving, new people taking over, and perhaps a handover not being perhaps as it should have been. So I didn't know whether there was anything that you wanted to put in as a recommendation around business continuity with staff leaving.
Yeah, I brought up the risk and opportunity plans for that basis. If the PM got run over today and tomorrow and his knowledge goes with him, all that information should be documented somewhere, I assume, on a tool line, risk and opportunity software package or whatever it is, however it is they track it. And that's the reason, one of the reasons behind that question was to make sure that's in place, and the CV indicated it was.
Could I add? That's something I brought up time and time again in the Resources Committee about this. We're a very thin council, and Duncan went. They said Duncan went, and I mean John noticed it, and John's professional. Yeah, that's his field of work, and he noticed that straight away, and that was really interesting illustration of that. And what we've said in the past, and I think Rachel said it, we need to reinforce what she said. They have a database of all this information, and that where officers go, it's not reliant on people, it's reliant on databases and structures, and that was brought up, I thought, really well.
Should we put a recommendation in around what you've suggested?
Yeah.
Around it was the risk and opportunities register is very important to ensure business continuity, and that's key. So we have just two recommendations. I thought I got away with two then, Stuart.
Recommendation is when we're working with voluntary groups that we, as far as possible, do it in a transparent and supportive way, because I think there are elements of that here as well. Not criticising officers, and we had officers here working with, but we need to maintain our policy of open government. I'm sorry, but
No, it's a good point, Stuart, but in fairness to the officers, and I picked up what...
I picked a lot of that
I did pick up what they said, particularly about Welsh Government issues, and I thought Rachel handled that very well in terms of confidentiality of contracts.
Confidentiality sometimes can be overdone.
Yeah, but I felt the officers handled that question fairly.
All right, no.
I want to bring this up for discussion rather than say it's a recommendation.
Yeah,
but do we
okay.
want to ask them to focus perhaps on the commercial opportunities available? Because they did say they've received very little
I wonder about that.
at present time. That might be something they're looking to do in the future. But I got the impression there was next to nothing in terms of buildings. And
What are we going to say anything about this confidentiality, open and
Well, if
transparent?
you're not happy with that, look, it's not about that. When you're working with voluntary groups, right, they've got a lot of time and effort, 30 years worth of voluntary effort in there, and they feel at times are not being listened to. Now, the other group they mentioned was Torvine Environmental Association, of which I am the chair. Now, we've got a lot of work that we've done with them, and we're central because we're providing the council and other people with landfill tax. Now, the point about that is these voluntary groups like that and other groups around the place are essential for the council to function in partnership. Yes?
So are we going to put a recommendation in? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. What is
I'll come back to the commercial.
Can I make this point very simply? Where we work in partnership with voluntary groups to enable us to deliver stuff like this, we be as transparent as possible.
Okay.
That's very simple.
All right, we'll put something in.
Yeah?
Giles, I don't know, can I just, the commercial opportunities one, the committee happy to put something in about that?
Yes.
A line about that? Norma, you're framing? No, you're right, No, just checking, you're happy? Okay.
There's a rider on that because Jason makes a good point on that, and it's also the fact that it's actually growing local businesses, and I would totally agree with that. And employment.
Right. Jason's on the commercial opportunities now, minutes too.
Yeah, we're actually very bad at growing local businesses.
Okay.
That's a good point.
I'm going to come to you now, Giles, after I've got this. Don't worry.
the recommendation would be to prioritise maybe or put more resource on attracting new commercial ventures to the site.
In time,
Yeah, at the right time. Yeah.
at the right time.
Because we've got very small...
Or at the appropriate
Not the
time.
borough is very bad at growing local businesses. It was only about, you say about the contract originally, it was just like a communication thing. If it had been communicated better, we say about being transparent and open, perhaps if it had been communicated better, why they couldn't share that information, it wouldn't have escalated where it was, so...
I thought they were fairly open when I asked that. I mean, I picked it up because it was one of the points, I think it was John Cox made fairly strongly, and I jotted it down and thought I'm going to get that in somewhere, so...
But that business, you see, is about mindset. Now, I've been involved with contracts with the borough and local voluntary organisations, and if you invert the way you do things, there's not a problem.
Okay, I think we've done enough. There's a couple of other things we've got
To do a couple of things on the next meeting.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to close the meeting now, but I've got to do...
Date and time.
Yeah, sorry, the date and time of the next meeting is it's on the 14th of November at 1:30. So that's a Wednesday.
Coming to that Wednesday.
So the pre-meeting will be on the Monday, the 12th at 10:30, is it?
I can...
We'll sort that out, yeah. So we'll sort out the dates and times of that. Now, I've been briefed to remind you that when we looked at our basket of items chosen during the visioning session, and we had topics coming up, the next topic is glyphosate, I believe. Right. But there was a recent Wales audit report. Well, it's not been published yet, is it, Kath?
Yeah, leave it as.
Yeah, but one of the issues that has arisen is should we be inviting executive members to these meetings? Now, we had the most senior official here today. So for the next meeting, I've got a series of questions I want the committee to consider. And this glyphosate is what we're going to discuss, which to me sounds like a very technical subject.
It's not at all.
well, it sounds like it, you know, but do you think there's a reason to invite the executive member to the next meeting? If yes, why?
Well, the use of glyphosate, if the council is employed in its use, we want to justify the reason behind it, if the cost statements they have in place are up to date, and I would also suggest that we want to invite any subcontractors.
We'll come to that.
Okay, there we go.
I just want to deal with the executive member first. We're all feeding this. Do you have any suggestions for invitees?
Yes.
Let me start with Jason, as he going first.
My understanding is that the subcontract to a lot of the boroughs done by Bron Avon, amongst others, so it would be worth finding out who does it and inviting their representatives.
So, should we say we'll find out who the major contractor is and invite them?
Yeah.
So that's a suggestion. And Stuart?
Yes, I would like, as a part of this, a major use of glyphosate at this time of year is to knock down Japanese knotweed, and I would like, as part of the glyphosate use, to actually know what our use is on, what our policy is on Japanese knotweed eradication, because it is the main use of it. The other part of this also is what is happening with the rest of the South East Wales authorities as a reference book.
I don't think
we can do it. We've done it before.
I'm also you can do it, Stuart. What I'm thinking, that's not an invitee.
Yeah. No. That's a question. The person I would also like to invite, because I've already asked him, is Chris Partridge from Keep Wales Tidy, the area manager. Sally Partridge's husband. And he's got quite strong views on it. Yeah, he's actually opposite views to what I have.
Okay, so Kathy, you were going to say something else?
Yeah.
I know you'd do it.
Points to it, yeah.
What I wanted to come in on that really was that the chair was asking about invitees and you were asking a question. So all I wanted to clarify so that you were aware of the approach is, obviously, as you know, every time we know what subject we're going to look at, we start filling one of these in the pro forma. In that pro forma will be those sorts of things that you would expect to see in the report. So those will be included in here. Yeah. So obviously, when Andrew Osborne did his speech in Visioning about the use of this, he did talk to you about the killing of the Japanese knotweed. Yeah. So those things will form a basis of the report, so you'll have that information within there. Another thing where you mentioned the South East Wales, it was really timely that it should happen. We had Visioning on sort of, I don't know, say the Wednesday. On the Friday, he had been contacted by Welsh Government to ask, were we doing anything with it? What was our policy? What was our procedure? Yeah. And they were doing an exercise across all of Wales. So what I'm hoping will be the case is by the time we ask for this report, Welsh Government will also have a wider response than just Torvines, which will give officers the opportunity to look at what's being done elsewhere and that sort of thing. So I'm hoping that will be positive. Councillor Cross has also been in touch with me because members of the public have been in touch with her about it. So it is quite a large issue, and I think there will be a lot of scope on the pro forma for us to add to this. Obviously, there's limited numbers of people here today, so when I update the pro forma, as I always do, and I send it out, I'll send it to the whole committee, and they'll also have the opportunity to add to it, so that you know, it won't be just what we've said today. Anyone else on the committee can add to that as well.
So, we also like, if possible, if we've got a local member of the Soil Association to get a completely opposite view of the current orthodoxy on it, because that would be problematical. We were going to probably get somebody who would give us the view. I know Chris Partridge's view is in favour of it for scientific reasons, and I know most of our officers will probably go down the orthodox line. But probably very few people around here will say completely do away with it. Although there is obviously the worry about people going out to Monsanto because of suing in America. But
I'd be interested to find out if there's anybody locally, and the only one I can think of is the Soil Association, because I know they're anti it. It'd be useful to have a view against it, because there are a lot of alternatives to using it, and we need to know those as well if we're going to go down the line. Because my personal view is I'm against it, but I can't go against it on Japanese knotweed. Simply, there isn't anything you can do. So I would say that because you're getting my personal view. I'm a member of Garden Organic.
Kath will do her best to explore those options. Finally, then, we've got that up, but Stuart. Finally, do any of the committee members have any suggestions for visits?
Yes. If you want a good visit, funnily enough, might be one of our allotments, because all those problems are actually encompassed there. The other place might be a local nature reserve, because where you've got Japanese swamp knotweed and Himalayan balsam, you can see the problems quite well.
If we want to do, I don't open-minded on this, but if you want to look at Himalayan balsam, Hentless nature reserve, yeah, he's doing a lot there. I mean,
Chris be good on that.
Jason?
I would say no. If you want to see weeds, you can step out of the door of Pontypool Centre and walk on any pavement. But what are we realistically going to learn?
Yeah. Norma, what do you think?
Well, it is a huge problem, Japanese knotweed, and it's all over the place. I mean, I got residents contacting me all the time. You can go anywhere and see it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
It's not really a particular problem. It is a problem for allotments, but it isn't any worse for them.
No.
It is for the general
I
public.
agree with Norma and
Oh, fair enough.
no, just in Himalayan balsam. Yeah. Okay. I think that's it, folks. I'd like to thank members, officers for attending, and as usual, a big thank you to all the hard work that's been done by Rachel and Kath, because most of the preparation for this isn't done by us as members, it's done by the officers in the background. They deserve all the credit. I'm closing the meeting now to the press and the public.